Coming up on Virginia Currents, find out how Virginia Untold helps open doors for African Americans looking to connect to their past and their future, and how this man's diligence enabled him to keep up with 13 family trees. Also, untold stories are spoken at the Ashland Theater by people who are black and white and grew up from different sides of the tracks in the 1950s and 60s in Hanover County. And how a dog named Tommy won over our hearts and opened our eyes to the reality of animal cruelty. Find out how you can help Richmond Animal Care and Control protect our community's pets. And we go on the move for a sip of the South Side at Brewers Cafe. Find out why it's much more than a great cup of coffee. Also the charming jazz of Kanika Cook. All next on Virginia Currents. Welcome to Virginia Currents. I'm Amy Lacey. Timothy Wilson's genealogical research has become a labor of love. He spent decades uncovering information for 13 family trees. As an African American, his struggle to find records on his ancestors, especially before the Civil War, is a common one. That's why in 2013, the Library of Virginia launched its extensive online program, Virginia Untold, the African American Narrative. The digital collection site gives people access to records, journals, newspapers, and many other important documents dating back hundreds of years. This information is the gateway to family roots and stories that until now had been untold.
Well, we began Virginia Untold in 2013 with a generous donation from Dominion Resources. We had two part-time people who were going to index and scan records, primarily local records to begin, the local government records collection. The idea was kind of sparked by a comment from Dr. Henry Louis Gates, Jr., who referenced the roadblock that African Americans often face when doing family research, especially prior to the Civil War.
But unless you have the researcher's spirit to be able to reconcile records, so when I look up an individual and I can find them in the census many times, I take those census and I line them up. I'm looking at the 1900, 1910, 1920, 1930, and even though it's 5 people in the household, I do it for each person, just to see if there's anything that's off. So that's why you must do comparative data analysis. Yeah, you have to. And a lot of people don't do that. And so they wonder why I know what I know about my family. I do a lot of reconciliation. Yeah. Yes, sir. That's right. That's right. Feed it up, over, across. Arch Wallace, the county of James City, being sick and weak in body, but of sound mind and disposing memory.
We chose the name Virginia Untold because these were stories that were not being told in the long history of Virginia. And we subtitled it The African American Narrative because this really is about stories. The stories of people, their experience, the stories of challenge and hardship and heartbreak that their families faced. So when we talk about this to folks, and not just African Americans, but people of all ethnicities and races, to really understand this history, to better understand where we are today, how we got here, because some of the things that we've been taught in history books over the decades have really glossed over a lot of this information. When we talk about this to folks, to really impress upon them the value of this material, we focus on the stories that can be gleaned by matching one record with another record with another record, and you're really piecing together almost like the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle.
I started this at the death of my maternal grandfather, Melvin Burford, in November of 1984. Upon getting ready to march down the aisle at his funeral, I saw some people that I knew that were close to us as friends of the family, or as I thought, but they were actually relatives, and I didn't know that. What my mother could not explain to me was the actual relationships, but she knew who her relatives were, but she just couldn't tell me how. So it became my quest to find out how are these people related to me. Because in our family, in my mother's immediate family, it was very small. By the time I was 13, I started to go to the state library, and my father would drop me off for about 4 hours at a time. I did a lot of my research from the census and marriage records, and I reconciled between the two very often.
This one is 1908 to 1916, so it should have it.
Okay,
All right, you're welcome.
Then I was able to look in within the decade that they lived, so I looked in the decades of them being a child, and I would look in the next decade of them being a young person, a maturing person, and then as they got older to their death. And then I would go back and trace each one of their children and repeat the cycle all over again. This is the house that my great-grandfather lived in after about 1926. He moved his second wife and his 2 sons here after the demise of his first wife. And he lived here until 1945 at his death. This was the home of Hansley C. Burford Sr., contractor, and that's what he was in the community.
We began primarily with local government records, so you have deeds of emancipation, deeds of manumission, coroner's inquisitions, freedom suits. In addition to those, we have petitions to remain in the Commonwealth, because in some folks who were free after 1806 had to leave the Commonwealth within 12 months. So some people had to make the difficult decision to remain enslaved even after they were freed, because they wanted to remain in Virginia with their loved ones. Another you'll find in here are free papers and free registers. If a free person of color lived in a locality, they had to register with the court, and they were given a piece of paper that indicated how they were free and had a description, a physical description of them, and they had to carry it with them at all times.
If you're gonna find someone like Grandpa Archer, who was born in 1806, that means that he showed up as a free man in 1850, the first census that showed the whole household. So he lived as a free African American, but that still meant that he had to watch his back. Even though he was born free, that didn't mean that he could live free in everyone's eyes within that society in that time. He still had to worry about, could someone take him and put him into servitude at a little of nothing? And no one, and in that society, if the white gentry said, you are no longer now free and we're gonna put you in servitude, and there's no one to vouch for you, that's it. I've always known about the issue of African Americans passing for white in other places. I have another relative that was from Newport Newsway. He was a mechanic. He actually was accepted into Ford Motor apprenticeship program in California. And they looked at him. He went all the way through the certification, received the certification, and then when he got on the floor working in their factory, there was a Caucasian supervisor that looked at him and said, "You're colored, aren't you?" He said, "Yes." And they fired him. And he came back home and he opened up his shop, but he received a certification. That was something they could not take away from him. Grandma Mary was born around 1878 in Rice, Virginia, in Prince Edward County, near the Amelia County line. She was a source of strength for the family. She died around 1946. That is one bona fide source of information that is handwritten and is actual, the bona fide information of the births of her children. And they're all born before the Civil War. At the death of my Aunt Jenny in 2010, she left that Bible to me. To pay all my debts, my just debts, and funeral expenses, but if she can pay off it, I prefer that she something. Lastly, I leave.
In addition, Virginia Untold uses our crowdsourcing transcription project called Transcribe that allows people to read these original records and type in transcriptions of them, so then they're keyword searchable. Right now we have 110,000 names in the database from approximately 10,000 records. So all of these disparate records come together in Virginia Untold, and that's what we feel is the major value, to be able to put these pieces together.
This is the first African American labor union for African American contractors within the city of Richmond.
Relating to the
This is my great-grandfather, Hansley C. Burford. And this is my grandfather, his son, Melvin B. Burford. It gives you strength. It gives you the knowledge that I have as a knowledge that a lot of African Americans don't have. They don't know who their family is or are or have been. I have a sense of belonging now to more than what I ever thought I would have had at 11 years old. And I can identify where my relatives are coming from. I'm identifying what they were doing. I'm always researching to find out more. I'm going back over what I already know to find out if I've missed anything. What brought around their deaths? Do we have certain things that I need to look for in my own health?
You have a photographic memory, don't you?
Yeah, that comes from both sides of the family.
The Virginia Untold logo includes a Sankofa bird symbol reaching toward an object on its back. It represents the need to connect with the past to prepare for a greater future. For more information on